It was announced earlier in the week, I believe it was on Monday, that one of the sets of Nijisanji members, Etheria, was essentially denied entry to Offkai. Offkai being a convention specifically for VTubers to meet up in person and do panels and all of those things. There was some surrounding controversy around this whole thing that I'm not really going to get into, involving people insinuating one way or another things that were happening. But at the end of the day, the main thing that is important is that Offkai made this decision, and they had made the decision 2 weeks prior to the announcement of it. And so the timing was mostly unfortunate and coincidental, and was mostly just based on the fact that they were telling all the people that were being denied things at that time. So it's unfortunate, but also I totally understand why a controversial situation like this is going to make people not want to deal with it. And that's something that major corporations have to deal with all the time. So it is what it is. Honestly, not too much more to say about this, but it's kind of crazy that it happened the same week. But as for stuff about the contracts, there's a lawyer who has been doing a lot of reviews for all of these situations and such, and he was given an unsigned contract that had been given out as essentially the employment contract, and we do have to trust his word that it is from a legitimate source, of course. I think he spent 4 hours going line by line through this contract and discussing the aspects of it that were sus. In particular, one of the things that he discussed in the very beginning was that it is very frequently stated by content creators like myself that VTubers in agencies are considered independent contractors rather than being considered employees. But long story short, the verbiage in the contract is actually what dictates whether or not you count as an employee, because you can kind of call anything that you want, and it doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is the rights, expectations, and restrictions imposed upon you in order to have employment with a entity, and whether or not that falls to that level. And the reason that that is important is that independent contractors have very different rights than employees, which I would be curious actually to see if this type of argument would be dug up more as well for the tech sector. It's infamous in my area where there's a revolving door of tech employees that are permanent contract workers, and the companies do everything in their power to prevent them from being technically classified as employees to a ridiculous degree. But I'm gonna play a brief clip reviewing the contract and why it's important.
Here's why this is important. Number one,
as he said,
this is probably the most bulletproof reason why this is an employee. An employee is exclusive. An employee cannot work anywhere else. A contractor can work wherever the fuck they want to work, right? But this is not what we see here. What we see here is they are an exclusive VTuber. That looks like ding, 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 an employee. This looks like an employee to me. This is an analysis. So what does that do, guys? Once again, this pulls us under labor law. So there are some places where this agreement would be completely thrown out because they did not get approval for this agreement under the local labor law or local labor rules in America, right? Maybe it doesn't, it's not following local provisions. This is a big one.
Very important for further discussion. A lot of the discussion about these issues revolves around the enforceability of these contracts and how there are lots of issues regarding the unenforceability and or straight up illegality of these contracts for American workers, which, clear disclaimer, he is talking about American law, not Canadian law, not Japanese law, but the law of the VTuber's homeland is what would be important in a dispute. So that's not really a controversial one. It's just an important thing to note. Let's see. This one is about... Oh, you know what? I clipped it well. It should explain itself.
Implement the activities at a place designated by party A.
Yes.
They can literally tell them where they have to live.
That's enough of the clip. The point is, it's directly in the contract that they can specify the location at which you perform your services, which for a normal job, it's one of those things that is sort of, it's kind of standard in that, you know, they can say that you have to work in the office or whatever, but it's more of a problem when we get into the penalties if you choose to disobey the contract and just things like that. And also it could mean that in the future, if they end up getting into trouble with this, they might just start saying, well, you know, as part of the contract, we're going to force you to move to a state that, you know, maybe doesn't have these laws protecting you, or to a country that doesn't have these laws protecting you, or else we'll void the contract. Entirely within what that contract states. Again, whether that's enforceable or not, or a judge would throw it out, different question entirely, but kind of a little bit of a yikes. Not the worst thing. This is where we start talking about the payments. Cannot help but think that Niji grabbed a random contract workers agreement and then Control F to change it. Okay, so some of that, yes. It's also very clear from this document that a lot of this is clearly just sort of probably auto-translated, because when you look at a lot of the verbiage, there's a lot of times where they have phrases like committing dishonorable acts, or committing acts that like impugn the honor of the corporation, or things like that, which are very Japanese type laws for defamation and things like that. But you know, it like doesn't necessarily make that much sense. This is starting to talk about the compensation. It looks like I don't remember exactly what this clip is, but part of it is that they expressly are saying that monetary compensation from things like super chats are a 50-50 cut after YouTube takes its cut, which essentially means you get a third of the super chat value. All things considered, that's pretty standard, but if I remember correctly, we're actually getting to a really spicy part right after this. This one is really important because this is talking about the company remunerating the talent for any business expenses, which is, again, pretty important part of the discussion.
It's a fee, right? In the event that Party A determines that it's necessary for Party B,
Party A being Nijisanji,
purchase new
by the way,
equipment for performing the distribution of contents, and Party B purchases the equipment designated by Party A, Party B may charge Party A for an amount of equipment equivalent to the cost of the purchase up to 200,000 yen. Okay? Provided, however, no exclusive fee will be charged if this agreement is terminated due to cancellation, termination, or other circumstance by the last day of the month. So if this is terminated or canceled, you get no fee.
So this, to put this slightly more in layman's terms, if the company decides that you need some new equipment or things like that, basically they can tell you that you have to get it, and then you have to essentially invoice the company to tell them how much to pay you. But they also say that it is limited to 200,000 yen, which for those of you who aren't familiar with the yen conversion rate, that is about 1,300 US dollars. Okay. So if Nijisanji's like, hey, your computer sucks, get a new one, but we'll only pay you for $1,300 of it. What? Excuse you very much? Like, my PC, I think, costs about 3K. And I'm small indie streamer with, you know, very, like, whatever. So they basically would only pay me for half of that, and that's only if they decide that it is of a requirement. So if they want to be stingy, they can just say, well, you know, we don't think you need it. You might be having lag and issues and whatever, but like, yeah, I don't know. Also, it seems fairly common for members to have bought part upgrades for their PC, and I have to wonder if that's a way to sort of haggle with it by making the single items that are getting compensation to be not more than 1,300 USD each, so that they can file multiple requests, because they won't do a full pre-made. They won't cover a full pre-made, even if they might cover multiple smaller items, which is wild. Wild. Yeah, that's bad, but it gets a lot worse. A lot of this is like things that you probably are going to pay for one time, but like, it's not the end of the world, but it's not great so far. This one though is where it gets really ugly, for given a lot of the rumors of what happened regarding Doki Bird, aka Selen, and bullying / harassment from staff and potentially other members, undisclosed. Again, reminder that the part about it being harassment from other members was something that Nijisanji themselves tweeted out. They probably shouldn't have. That was pretty stupid, but this part is all about that, and you can imagine how it's going to be a problem.
I can imagine them gaslighting, like, for example, Doki with this, saying, well, if you were being harassed, you should have told us, right? You should have filed a notification of that complaint. Like, why didn't you do that?
Because the previous section was saying that you need to inform them right away.
Right. And then next, in the case of the preceding paragraph, so if you have a dispute with another one, you shall handle the dispute at your own cost? No. Guys, no. 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 So wait a second. They're saying if you are fighting with another Nijisanji Vtuber, they're not gonna mitigate that?
Part of it, which was cut off from this clip, some of that context is okay in that it was also covering things that were external entities that you might be having conflicts with, and they basically said, listen, if you start beef with somebody, that's your problem. But the fact that it very specifically is it also including internal members is such a breeding ground for a hostile workplace environment, when they say, well, listen, if you're having problems, figure it out. We won't help. We won't pay. We're not responsible. Actually, you absolutely, as a company, are responsible if your employees are having disputes with one another. It's like textbook definition of what your HR duties are, which again, this dovetails back into why it's important as to whether or not they are considered contractors or employees. Can you imagine that at any job? They're like, well, you know, figure it out. So nothing that happens is our problem. Like, that's not how any of this works. The thing is that in Western countries, that does not fly, both culturally but also legally. The labor standards in pretty much any non-Asian country, and I can't speak for any of the Asian countries specifically, but in any of the non-Asian countries, if there were to be a legal dispute, they would absolutely say, no, sorry, you can't just write in whatever you want and it's just automatically done. There are many, many, many cases in contract law where essentially a company will basically just say, well, we're just allowed to do whatever we want because we say so, and you signed it, so it's too bad, right? But that doesn't fly. You can't put in a clause that makes somebody a literal slave. Like, you can't sign away your life, your right to freedom, and or things like that. And so there's lots of unenforceable aspects in contract law, which is very important to consider for all of this. But it's kind of wild that that's their default stance. It's just further proof that they didn't do their research. Yeah, absolutely. And then this is where it gets really scary and really as much as I was down on some of the livers that made the quote unquote black screen announcement for, you know, saying you always have a choice, this next segment is real bad, which, again, I'll let it speak for itself, but it has to do with what happens if you terminate the agreement between yourselves and essentially how they decide to classify the conflict. It's also highly relevant to what happened with the Last Cup of Coffee release from Selen / Doki Bird.
Amount equal to the total amount of consideration.
Consideration being what they have paid you.
They can take it all if you breach Article 15, Paragraph 4. Let's go back to Article 15, Paragraph 4. What's that?
Yeah, we don't need to see that part. That basically is the part talking about if you basically do anything that we don't authorize, then that's what that section is breaching. So their contract essentially says that they can come after you for 50 to 100% of the income that they paid you over the past year if you breach contract. So it is a very real possibility that not only are many of these VTubers in a hostage situation with their jobs and their future income, but worried that they have a bag over their head, a sort of Damocles, if you will, that says they will owe the last year's worth of wages as damages, which again, the enforceability of that, highly suspect. I would suspect that most courts would probably throw that out, but imagine you're a 20-something year old content creator and this big company is saying, yeah, well, you know, listen, if you speak out of turn or you say anything we don't like, well, we may just sue you for your entire last year's wages. And when you combine that with the fact that it appears that many, many, many of these talents are doing a lot of their funding out of pocket, that's like, again, Doki spent $200,000 in her previous year, spent $200,000 on events and things like that to make them happen. And so not only is she out that money just in general because she wasn't compensated for it, but the company could ostensibly say, and actually also we are going to fine you the $250,000 that you earned last year that you then spent on those events. Like, it is absolutely unconscionable. It's insane. This is a meaty document. If you want, I certainly would encourage you to check out Legal Mindset's videos on it, because like I said, he does go line by line explaining the legalese and dissecting whether or not it is valid, enforceable, etc., at least as far as American law is concerned. And the final little cherry on top is regarding Zion Lanza, who was terminated about a year ago now. And she provided the receipts that showed that she was given essentially a gag order document, NDA, to sign at her termination that essentially said, you can't say anything. We're going to put out the same press release that we were going to put out anyway, effectively defaming you. And you're going to be like extra double NDA'd. And by the way, you have 1 hour to sign it. The DMs showed explicitly that here's the contract. We want you to sign it by this time JST, which is in about 1 hour, which, listen, if you're coming after somebody and saying that they need to read and sign a legal document in 1 hour, that's bad. That's really bad. And it shows that either you are truly trying to just blackmail and intimidate somebody into it, or that you really have something that you want them to sign it and they really shouldn't. Again, not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but timestamps provided of the messages with that contract and asking her to sign it. And she has also spoken on her current persona / past life about the situation recently. And I'm sure it's probably totally illegal, but you know, they can get away with it. So anyway, it's been a spicy week in drama slash news slash leaks. I don't even think this is really drama. It's just crazy. Like, these kinds of disclosures are absolutely insane, and who's to say? We don't know that any of the other agencies are better or worse. I would suspect that some of them are as bad, some of them are worse, and some of them are better. Non-committal, obviously. There's some good and some bad out there. Who could have guessed? But there's a lot of language in here as well that I did not clip and put in here about the complete and total ban on any VTubing activities concurrent with your employment here, which we know for a fact is not something that is done in HoloLive, as various members maintain past life activities, at least at a bare minimum, and are public enough about it that it's not sneaky. And, you know, as long as they don't say that they are the same person as the talent in HoloLive, that's pretty much their main thing. Is they can't go out and say, hey, I'm actually Gargura, I'm actually Mori Calliope. And as long as they don't do that, it's kind of fine. It's just that most of them don't do too much on it, because obviously it's effectively impossible to maintain two different identities, one mega corpo and one indie at the same time. But they aren't prohibited from it and certainly aren't fined for it. So that is your too long didn't watch, because again, this is summarizing about 5 hours worth of legal breakdowns, but it's crazy, and I expect that we're going to be seeing a lot. I expect we're going to be seeing a lot more shit hit the fan. Additionally, I saw it mentioned that the contracts were for 2 years, meaning that a lot of the biggest members in Nijisanji are coming up on their 2-year mark of their contracts. So I am expecting a very turbulent few months.
Fuck yes.
Fuck yes.